Endure by WaferThin. Ending. Everything was ending. Twilight Sparkle had never considered the end, not like this at least. Certainly, like all ponies, she had thought about her own end, when the inevitable of death that is closely tied to her own existence is not something you can easily ignore. Like most others, she had come to terms with her own mortality, with the knowledge that she would fade. She would end. The end of everything, though, was a different matter. It was incomprehensible. It was like the concept of infinity. The knowledge of it was commonplace and accepted, but rarely considered. It was something so vast and so distant, and so it was put aside in favor of smaller, closer issues, the troubles that would be understood more readily. Right up until the day Twilight Sparkle saw the end. It was a night like any other. Luna's night sky looked as spectacular as ever, and Twilight, along with many others across the land, who had joined in a resurgence of interest in astronomy since the princess's return, was ready to admire its wonder. She set herself for yet another sleepless night before the eternal and endless universe above her. Her life was shattered by what she saw through that telescope. There, between the constellations, long known, was a pinprick of light. A curiosity, she supposed, a passing phenomena, nothing more. Right until she took a closer look. What she saw was little more than a rock, floating through space. But she knew this was something different, something more. Her heart told her that this was what this truly was, a speeding ball of destruction, hurtling towards Equestria, barely a year away by her estimations. If she was right, it would bring an end to everything she had ever seen, ever heard, and ever known. There was a flurry of activity in the library the following days. Twilight was the ever-pragmatist. She couldn't act on only a feeling, after all. Textbooks had been checked to see if it was just a regular celestial occurrence, and if there was nothing else to worry about. Her findings had to be ratified by some of the most knowledgeable minds in Equestria too. Finally, though, there could be no doubt. This would be Equestria's doom. Obviously, she had taken her findings to Princess Celestia the moment she was sure. Her mentor, Twilight reasoned, would undoubtedly be able to stop this. She and her sisters held sway over the sky, but over both day and night. They controlled the heavens themselves, and so they would be able to avert this coming cataclysm. They couldn't. It was explained to her, of course. The cosmic alicorns were bound to their respective heavenly bodies, and although they held enormous power, they couldn't apply their magic so freely to other situations. Such acts could destroy worlds. They were so very limited, they told her. Surely, Twilight remembered the changeling invasion, when Celestia had been rendered useless against the Queen. They knew she did. She remembered everything. Regardless, the truth broke her heart. Her mentor, her ruler, the bedrock of a lifetime, in all her wisdom and glory and power, not even she could stop this. What of the elements of harmony? Surely they would be able to prevent this catastrophe, she had pleaded. They had proven themselves before, stopping rampant alicorns and the god of chaos, so surely they could be used to protect Equestria again? No, of course not. The elements too were restricted. They came to keep ponydom together, to unite and strengthen the bonds between pony tribes, and to preserve harmony. They couldn't stop the coming fire. They could do nothing to stop the end. By this time, the word had begun to trickle through the world. The experts Twilight had consulted were so shaken by her discovery that they could not keep it to themselves, knowing what was coming nearly upon them. The rumors spread, and the ponies began to fear. As such, Twilight Sparkle was called upon by all who could find reason to request her advice, sure in the knowledge that the most powerful unicorn of their time and the chosen student of the princess herself would be able to lay her fears to rest. She spoke to war councils and planned committees, builders and governors, ambassadors and representatives of all creatures of the world. Each time, the questions were the same. Is this the truth? How long do we have? And ultimately, with the moment she dreaded most, what can we do to stop it? That was the hardest part. no matter how often Twilight repeated it, and regardless of the princess's many public speeches, it was still an impossibility at most. The very idea of the end of everything was so unfathomable that they still believed there would be some way out, a way to save the world. But there wasn't. Slowly, they all learned that this truly was unstoppable. Equestria took the news hard. Panic gripped the world as the creatures everywhere came to realize that everything they had worked for, everything they had built, and that what had been built before that time, all of it would end. From the most wondrous cities to the smallest of memories, the most hardy of landmarks to the most temporary and fleeting of lives, it had all been for naught. Their land would be cleansed with fire until no trace remained of their lives, the moments and places they had remembered so fondly. For a time there was chaos. The ponies of Equestria went mad with fear, ceasing to think and run amok. They stole and they smashed. There were even whispers of ponies who, in their darkest hours, harmed one another. In their grief, they would have destroyed themselves, had the princesses not been forced to intervene. With the royal Canterlot guards patrolling the country for the good of the very ponies that they cowed into peace, there would be no further unrest. The asteroid had an official designation. It had been labeled Sigma TS6 by the academic bodies of the world. The ponies of Equestria gave it another name, though. Perhaps it came out of the sense of poetry, or irony, or even a misplaced desire for vengeance, no matter how small. They called it Twilight's Herald. And that's what it became. The Herald of Equestria's Twilight. With Celestia and Luna doing their utmost to keep peace, ponies could panic no more. Instead, the nation simply stopped. Knowing as they did, no matter what they achieved, it would all end so very soon. Ponies saw no need to continue. The news spread beyond Equestria's borders too, and races and species everywhere wept. There was further madness. The other races succumbed to the same grief-stricken insanity that very nearly took the heart of Equestria. Some acted with disbelief, decrying it as a pony trick. Others tried to salvage what they could of their civilizations, digging deep into the ground and hiding in the dark, hoping to outlast the coming storm. The princesses did what they could, but they were having so much trouble maintaining order within their own borders that they could do nothing to truly help those trapped beyond, where the madness roamed freely. In the final days, Equestria became a beacon, a refuge from the destruction that had come before the true end. Even enemies of the state sought the protection of ponykind, and all were welcomed as equals. Unity was all that these races had left, so they clung to it desperately. Twilight, meanwhile, had heralded the end of the world, and her own world very nearly ended. The very naming of Equestria's doom was like a twist of a knife to her. Each time she heard it, she couldn't help but hear the accusations and blame she imagined that came with it. Her very name, which had once stood as a word of strength, of hope, and of the light that had fought against the darkness, became a sign of the end times, and it burned her inside. Only the strength of her friends, her cherished and loved ones, kept it from crumbling as the world around her did. Even at the end of all things, she was reminded that her friendships had withstood so much, and would even withstand this cleansing of the land. And so she stood. She watched the world end. She watched, alongside her friends, her family, and her mentor, as Twilight's herald destroyed everything. She saw mighty cities, small towns, the strain and toil of thousands of years. All of it was obliterated in the blink of an eye. She watched the world end. She turned from the devastation and leaned into the warm, loving, and everlasting embrace of her mentor.
All of it.
She muttered into the pure white fur as it dried her tears.
It's all gone.
She felt a pressure on her head as the alicorn rested her own atop it, and felt as much as heard the reply as it vibrated through her body.
All things must end one day.
Came Celestia's soft voice, heavy with sadness.
But some may yet endure a little while longer.
Twilight leaned out of Celestia's hold. raising her teary eyes to meet her mentor's clear ones.
All things end, my little pony.
The ancient mare continued grimly, her eyes filled with the weariness of the eons.
I have seen many endings in my time here.
Her voice dropped, barely to a whisper.
Even I shall end one day.
Celestia looked away. She looked at her world as it burned to nothing, watched the land as she had ruled over and kept safe for thousands of years as it crumbled into ash. For a moment, she was silent.
Until that day,
She continued finally, turning back to her student with a small smile, tinged with a tired grief.
I shall do as I have done for millennia, and as Equestria shall continue to do.
She nodded to an area behind Twilight, and then the smile grew slightly. Twilight twisted slowly around to face the encampments behind her. Though segmented, they were representative of each and every inhabitant of the ravaged world that hung in the void above her. Off to her right, a flock of griffins, somehow remaining aloof and proud despite their circumstances, ignored the devastation in preference of discussing the trade routes through the New World with the representative of the Minotaur clans. To her left, she watched as the kingdom of dragons came together as one, singing their gruff melodies, their odes to the memory of their destroyed homeland. She winced as, even from such a distance, she could hear the disharmonious voice of her beloved assistant as he joined with his people, learning the history that had come so close to being lost. Behind them, in the distance, rose a great black oval, a hive containing thousands of changelings in a hibernation state. It soared upwards, its tips stretching almost to dark blue energy shield that Luna had constructed as an artificial atmosphere high above their heads. Directly in front of her was the seemingly endless sea of tents that made up the pony camp. Thousands like her were watching the apocalypse, watching as their world died. Thousands of more had turned away in despair, unable to see the lives destroyed so utterly. Finally, she saw 5 ponies, barely out of earshot, and they saw her. They had shared so much together, and not even the end of everything could erase the love she felt for each of them. As they caught her gaze, she was reminded of all the times they had helped her, and that she had helped him. She knew that those times would last with her forever, regardless of what happened to the places they happened in. She watched as they smiled. Even now, they were so ready to support her, and she saw them start slowly walking towards her. She saw all of this, and so much more. The entire surface of the moon was covered in similar encampments. The lunar body had become an ark, a safe haven from the end of the world. In the last days of the Equestria, an idea had formed. Celestia had told Twilight of the spell she used to banish her corrupted sister to the moon. It had been a simple teleportation spell, combined with the power of harmony that had created this exile. Surely, then, a more temporary application of the spell could be used now, in his desperate hour of need. And so it was that the moon became a shelter, the population transported there, to wait until the crisis passed, and the healing of the world through a combined magical application could begin. Every pony and every refugee of Equestria had been brought, along with as many others as they could, who could be convinced to come. Celestia and Luna had saved every creature they could, and every civilization that was willing to be teleported into space to avoid the devastation was there, sheltered from the storm. Eventually, they would return to the desecrated planet. It would take an enormous effort, years of toil, of pain and stress, but they would rebuild. Together, the creatures of the world would make it anew. It would never be the same, but it would still be their home. Twilight Stratagem, they had called it. The last hope for the survival of Equestria. The final light in the darkness. She turned back to Celestia. The same sadness-tinged smile the goddess had shown her now gracing her own lips. She leaned back against her mentor and felt the comforting weight of her wing as it draped protectively around her. A moment later, she felt hooves clenching around her, drawing her into a group embrace with 5 ponies whom she loved most dearly.
Endure.
Twilight whispered.
We will endure.
The end.